Look at her, just 8 years old. Rica Rountree, full of life, big imagination, loved her dolls like they were her own kids. Probably because they treated her better than the real adults in her life. She looks like any other happy child. But behind closed doors, happiness wasn't part of the script. Bruises covered her body. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. Her cries for help echoed, loud enough to be heard, just not loud enough to make anyone care. Her school noticed. Teachers saw the bruises, the strange behavior. Investigators later found video evidence. Actual footage of Cynthia Baker, her dad's girlfriend, handing out beatings like they were part of a daily routine. And the text messages? Oh, they read like a to-do list for monsters. Two adults, casually planning punishments like Rika was some kind of problem to be fixed. She needed protection. Instead, she got ignored. And in the end, silence did what her abusers couldn't. It finished the job. Some stories make you question humanity. This one? It makes you wonder if humanity even showed up. Rica Rountree didn't just have a rough childhood. She lived in a house where love was an endangered species. Every cry for help was met with silence. Every bruise was a question no one wanted to answer. And the system? Oh, it noticed, then politely looked the other way. She wasn't invisible. Teachers saw the bruises. Neighbors heard the screams. Child protection workers had a front row seat to the horror show. But somehow everyone played a game of not my problem until it was too late. This isn't just a story about abuse. It's a story about how a system with all the red flags in the world still managed to ignore a little girl who needed saving. But before we dive in, shout out to you, yes, you, the ones who like, share, and comment. You make sure stories like these don't just disappear into the void. If you're new, hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get into it. Rica Rountree, born in 2008, a kid with a big imagination and a bigger heart. Her mom, Antonetta Simmons, tried to give her a safe home. But safety isn't just about trying, it's about succeeding. Rica Rountree wasn't just a kid. She was a walking beam of sunshine. Her joy was the kind that could make even the grumpiest person crack a smile. She had this rare gift, making everyone around her feel special, like they actually mattered. Her favorite thing in the world? Dolls. But for Rica Rountree, they weren't just plastic and fabric. They were her family. She dressed them, fed them, tucked them in at night, creating a world where she was in control, a world where love was guaranteed and pain wasn't part of the deal. If only real life worked that way. Rica Rountree wasn't just about imagination. She was kind, thoughtful, the kind of kid you'd expect to grow up and change the world. To her mom, Anne, she wasn't just a daughter, she was a shadow, a best friend, always by her side. They laughed together, played together, and for a while, life almost felt like a fairy tale. Then 2016 happened, and fairy tales don't come with plot twists like this. Anne, a single mom, was drowning under the weight of bills. No matter how hard she tried, trying wasn't paying rent. So she made a choice. Not out of greed, not out of recklessness, out of sheer desperation. She turned to selling drugs. Because when survival knocks, morals tend to take the back seat. Anne wasn't a villain, just a desperate mother backed into a corner. But desperation doesn't get you a free pass. And in September 2016, it landed her in handcuffs. And just like that, Rica and her brother were thrown into a world of uncertainty. Rica wasn't just losing her mom, she was being handed over to Richard Rountree, her biological father. Sounds like a solid backup plan, right? Except Anne had never trusted him. And when a mother says something feels off, maybe, just maybe, you listen, she begged. She pleaded. She warned them. Do not send her there. But to the system, Anne wasn't a mother anymore, just an inmate. Her words didn't matter. Her fears didn't count. They saw my arrest, not my daughter's safety, she later said. I told them she wouldn't be safe. No one listened. And here's the kicker. Rica wasn't just moving in with her father. She was stepping into a house that might as well have come with a warning label. Richard's girlfriend, Cynthia Baker, lived there too. A woman with a hobby of abusing children. One time she even tried to drown a stepchild. You'd think that kind of history would raise a few red flags. Maybe, I don't know, set off some alarms? But DCFS took one look at all those warning signs and thought, hey, let's roll the dice. DCFS had one job: keep kids safe. Instead, they handed Rica over to a nightmare wrapped in a family-sized disaster. They saw Richard as the better option, ignored Anne's warnings, and completely missed the giant red flags waving in the wind. From day one, Rica wasn't a daughter. She was a problem to be fixed. And Cynthia Baker was more than happy to take on the role of problem solver. At just 8 years old, Rica's childhood turned into a survival game. Holding heavy cans of food? That was her fun activity, except fun meant trembling arms and Cynthia's fury every time they dropped. Meals? Not for her. She sat alone while everyone else ate, hungry and invisible. Her clothes? Rags? Her bed? A cold mattress on the floor, because comfort was apparently optional. And her beloved dolls? Gone. Destroyed. Piece by piece, Cynthia ripped away everything Rica loved, as if joy itself was a crime. But DCFS, they still thought they made the right call. Physical abuse was just the warm-up. Cynthia wasn't satisfied with bruises. She wanted to break Rica completely. No love, no laughter, just fear. She cut Rica off from the family, turning her childhood into a prison sentence. And DCFS? Oh, they had plenty of chances to step in. Teachers, neighbors, even school staff waved red flags like they were signaling a sinking ship. But DCFS, they took one look and said, hey, looks fine. Let's rewind. Early 2016, a teacher spots bruises, reports it. DCFS investigates. Nothing happens. Weeks pass, bruises stay. September, new bruises, new report. DCFS marks it as investigated and closes the case. No follow-up, no safety check, just paperwork and apathy. Meanwhile, Rica was still trapped in that house, and no one was coming to save her. By fall 2018, Ra was in 3rd grade, shivering through Illinois winters without a coat. The school staff, doing what any decent person would, gave her one. Instead of gratitude, Cynthia showed up furious, accusing them of favoritism. Never mind that her own daughter had a coat. Kindness, apparently, was a personal attack. A few days later, on December 10th, Rica missed 2 days of school. When she returned, both her eyes were blackened, bruises fading at different rates. The school staff reported it again. DCFS sent investigator Patricia Shannon again. The school nurse pointed out the obvious. This wasn't an accident, but Rica learned her lines. She forced a smile, said she tripped over her toys, and just like that, DCFS nodded, checked a box, and walked away. Rica's mother knew the truth. Her daughter was too terrified to speak up. The lies weren't to protect herself. They were to survive. Telling the truth only meant more pain. DCFS, still pretending to care, told Richard and Cynthia to take Rica to a doctor. Richard, in a move of pure convenience, shrugged and said their doctor was on vacation. And the emergency room? Too expensive. $200 was just too much when it came to a battered child. Cynthia, ever the loving caregiver, claimed Rica's medical card was expired and she simply didn't have time between raising, tormenting other children. When a doctor insisted Rica needed an X-ray, Cynthia waved it off. No need. Her schedule was far too packed to prioritize the broken child in her care. Then on December 11th, DCFS made another move, an interview with Cynthia's teenage daughter. Another chance for the system to act. Another chance to fail. Cynthia's teenage daughter wasn't home when Rica supposedly fell onto her toys, but even she seemed to know that story was nonsense. She admitted Rica had mentioned the accident, though the details were murky, probably because there was nothing accidental about it. DCFS, still playing detective, tried to interview Cynthia's 6-year-old daughter that same day, but Cynthia wasn't having it. She shut them down, refusing to let them question the child. And just like that, another dead end, another excuse, another failure. Meanwhile, Rica was slipping away. Her school counselor called DCFS again, reporting that she was withdrawing from the world. Her grades tanked, her spirit dimmed. The bright little girl who once eagerly participated in class was disappearing. Caseworkers stopped by a few more times, like visitors checking in on a zoo exhibit. They saw the bruises. They heard the same recycled excuses. And then, like clockwork, they walked away. Case closed. By April 2019, Rica Rountree was barely there. The once lively girl was now a ghost of herself, silent, frail, and fading fast. Teachers who had known her since kindergarten watched helplessly as her light went out. She didn't raise her hand anymore. She didn't smile. She just stopped. Mrs. Harris had watched Raw fade away right in front of her. She used to be so full of life, she recalled, her voice heavy with regret. By spring, it was like she was disappearing. She wouldn't talk, wouldn't smile. It was like she was afraid to exist. The bruises told a story Rica never would. Arms, neck, legs, evidence of a nightmare no child should endure. Mrs. Harris reported it. Again, and again, and again. But the system was a broken record, skipping over her cries for help. Then came January 6, 2018. Cynthia Baker had always been cruel, but that night she went too far. The beatings had escalated. The punishments more savage. The details of what happened remain a mystery. But the outcome was undeniable. Rica Rountree, small, battered body, couldn't take it anymore. By the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. Doctors worked desperately to undo the damage, but there was no fixing what had been broken for so long. This wasn't a tragic accident. It wasn't fate. It was years of unchecked cruelty, piling up until Ross simply couldn't hold on. At just 8 years old, Rica Rountree was gone, and the people who were supposed to save her, they had let her slip right through their fingers. As body was a map of pain, a silent testimony of every brutal act she had suffered. The nurses and doctors didn't need her to speak. The evidence was written across her skin. Bruises, some fresh, others fading like old memories, covered her from head to toe. Her back, arms, legs, even her face, bore the signature of relentless violence. Fists, belts, shoes. The tools of her suffering were unmistakable. On January 26, 2019, Dr. Matthew Fox conducted an autopsy at the Peoria County Coroner's Office. What he found wasn't just tragic, it was horrifying. Ra's body carried more than 60 scars, each one a chapter in the nightmare she had lived. Her face, chin, chest, back, arms, thighs, no part of her had been spared. But the real damage wasn't just skin deep. Inside, her body told a darker truth. A perforated intestine, a gut-wrenching injury that had been left untreated, internal scarring from past trauma, bruises on her face and arms, hemorrhaging around her pancreas, fluid in her lungs, swelling in her brain, and worst of all, her abdomen was filled with blood. A silent, deadly storm raging inside her. The official cause of death, peritonitis, a severe infection from that torn intestine. A death that wasn't instant, wasn't painless. It was slow, excruciating, and completely preventable. All it would have taken was a trip to the doctor, a single hospital visit, a moment of care. Rica Rountree had been vomiting for days. She had complained of stomach pain. Cynthia Baker admitted she was losing balance, her vision blurring. These weren't subtle signs. They were red flags, screaming for attention. And yet nothing was done. Ra didn't die because of one blow. She died because of a system that ignored her. Because the people who should have protected her turned a blind eye. Because, in the end, she was just another case file marked closed. Rica could have been saved. A single doctor's visit, a little compassion, maybe even just someone paying attention. But instead, her pain was ignored, her suffering dismissed like an inconvenience. She was left to die. 5 days later, on January 31st, 2019, the Department of Children and Family Services received yet another report. This time, it wasn't just about Rica Rountree, it was about her surviving siblings. Richard Ree and Cynthia Baker, defying a so-called safety plan, had continued to have contact with them. It raised a chilling question. Were they trying to keep their story straight? Coaching the kids before the truth unraveled? Despite no criminal charges yet, Richard and Cynthia wasted no time lawyering up. Not for justice, not out of grief, just pure self-preservation. There was no funeral, no memorial, no tearful goodbyes. Instead, Rica's body was quietly sent to a funeral home in Gilbert for cremation. But Rica wasn't going to disappear that easily. On February 2nd, 2019, just before her remains were reduced to ash, authorities intervened. McLean County officials ordered a second, more thorough autopsy. This time, the truth would not be buried. Chief forensic pathologist Dr. Scott Denton conducted the exam. Only after that, on February 11th, Rica's body finally cremated. That same day, Cynthia and Richard's remaining children were removed from their grasp and placed into protective custody. For those children, the nightmare might have ended. Rica Rountree, it never would. And yet amid all of this, Cynthia Baker, the monster at the center of it all, felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no remorse. When she learned Ra was dead, her first concern wasn't that she had taken a child's life. It was the vomit on the floor. "You better clean that up. It's disgusting." That was her only reaction. Not the loss of a little girl, not the months of torture she had inflicted, just the inconvenience of a mess. But she had left behind a mess far worse than she realized, because investigators weren't done with her. They dug deeper, into her house, into her life, and most importantly, into her phone. And that's when they found everything. Videos, dozens of them, stored in her iCloud, not blurry, out-of-context clips, not questionable evidence. This was a horror movie, starring Ra as the unwilling victim and Cynthia as the villain. In one, Cynthia screams at Rica, forcing her to perform pointless tasks under threats of punishment. In another, she beats her hard, repeatedly. Ra flinches, curls up, tries to shield herself. It doesn't matter. The hits keep coming. Her body shakes, her face twisted in fear. It was all there, captured in vivid, undeniable detail. Cynthia Baker had filmed her own crimes. The footage wasn't just evidence, it was a confession. When prosecutors saw it, even they struggled to comprehend the level of cruelty. How had this gone on for so long? How had no one stopped it? And then the videos leaked. The public reaction was instant, explosive. Outrage flooded newsrooms. People demanded answers. How could this happen? How could a little girl be brutalized on camera and still be ignored? This wasn't just about one evil woman anymore. This was about everyone who had failed Rica Rountree, the system, the people who looked the other way, the ones who heard her cries and chose silence. Rica Rountree had been invisible in life, but in death she became impossible to ignore. On April 24, 2019, Cynthia Baker's luck finally ran out. She was arrested, slapped with charges that read like a villain's resume: first-degree murder, aggravated battery, multiple counts of child abuse. The system, slow as it was, had finally woken up. But if anyone thought this was going to be a quick case of bad woman goes to jail, they were dead wrong. Cynthia wasn't going down without a fight. The public braced for a spectacle. The media sharpened their knives. Every twist, every courtroom glare, every legal loophole was dissected by a nation still trying to process what had happened to an 8-year-old girl. Rica Rountree. Rica's mother, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about waking up every day to the soul-crushing truth. Her daughter was gone. "Every day without her feels like a lifetime," she once said. "I wish I could have protected her. I failed her. I will always fail her." She wasn't the only one haunted by regret. The community, neighbors, teachers, even the grocery store cashier who had seen Ra's small face week after week, looked back and wondered, did I miss something? Could I have done something? And then came the trial. On one side, Cynthia Baker, the woman accused of treating a child like a disposable object. On the other, prosecutors, fueled by outrage and an ironclad case, determined to bring justice for a little girl who never got a chance. They didn't hold back. First came the forensic evidence, the kind that doesn't lie, doesn't bend, doesn't care for excuses. Rica Rountree's small body was a roadmap of torment, bruises, burns, scars. But it was the internal injuries that sealed the deal. Her abdomen, a war zone, ruptured organs, a massive tear, death by peritonitis, her own body poisoned from the inside. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was systematic, repeated, personal, and just when the courtroom thought they had seen the worst, enter the videos, Cynthia Baker's personal highlight reel of horror. Stored neatly in her iCloud, as if she thought one day, I might want to relive my finest moments of child abuse. The footage was grainy, but the terror was crystal clear. One video. Rica scrubbing floors for hours, arms shaking, exhaustion in every movement. Cynthia standing over her, barking orders like some deranged drill sergeant. Another clip, a slap across the face. Hard, unapologetic. Raw flinches, eyes wide, knowing more is coming. She tries to protect herself, but it's useless. The jury watched in horror. There was no spinning this. No lawyerly gymnastics could explain away the brutality captured in those frames. That video wasn't just evidence. It was a death sentence. The jury sat frozen. The videos were bad enough, but the real horror show was yet to come. Cynthia Baker's own children took the stand. Their voices wavered, heavy with memories they had tried to bury. They had seen it all. Rica crying in dark corners, too afraid to move. Cynthia's rage over the smallest mistake, the begging, the bruises, the endless fear that turned their home into a house of horrors. One of them whispered through tears, "She never stood a chance." Then came Anne, Rica's mother. She stood before the court, a woman shattered but unbreakable. She loved to play, Anne's voice cracked. She had this laugh that could light up a room. And now she's gone. I couldn't save her, but I will make sure the world remembers her. The trial stretched on, but the verdict had been decided the moment those videos played. On July 14, 2019, Cynthia Baker heard her fate. Life in prison, no parole, no second chances, no escape. Justice? Maybe. But Ra was still gone. No sentence could bring her back. And then there was Richard Ree, Rica's father. He had heard the screams. He had seen the bruises. And he did nothing. Turns out, silence isn't just cowardice. It's complicity. A series of damning text messages confirmed it. Richard knew. He had every chance to step in, to be the father Ra desperately needed. Instead, he let her suffer. Now, he wasn't just mourning his daughter. He was facing justice too. Cynthia's prison cell had room for one more. The ones between Rica Rountree and Cynthia Baker weren't just disturbing. They were a full-blown confession wrapped in digital breadcrumbs. Between July and September 2018, these two texted like a villainous duo straight out of a bad crime novel. Except their target wasn't an enemy or a rival. It was little Rica, a child, a defenseless little girl they despised simply for existing. July 16, 2018. Cynthia, ever the warm and nurturing figure, red, absolute monster, described Rica as a little hard-headed. A few days later, she was done playing nice. "It's time for Ra to leave," she told Richard. His response? "It is, babe." That wasn't frustration. That was a deal. A sick, twisted agreement to rid themselves of a child in need of love. Cynthia's cruelty knew no bounds. "I'm not talking to that little girl. She don't ever tell the truth unless you have a belt to her." Charming. Nothing says responsible parenting like advocating for beating a child into submission. But she wasn't done. She later texted Richard, "I love you too, but damn, I really hate your daughter." Let that sink in. The messages didn't stop. The lies didn't stop. On September 5th, 2018, Cynthia wrote, "I Rica Ra to say she was playing in the dark and hit her eye." Richard, the ever-supportive partner in crime, responded, "Sounds good to me." A coordinated cover-up. A fake excuse for the very real pain they were inflicting on a little girl. August 12th, 2019. Richard Rountree took a plea deal, guilty of endangering a child's life, sentenced to 8 years in prison for watching, for allowing, for failing the one person who depended on him most. A slap on the wrist for a father who stood by while his daughter suffered. Sure, Cynthia's sentence was harsher, but Richard, he got off easy. But Rica's story isn't just about monsters disguised as parents. It's about a system that let it happen. Reports of abuse were filed. Teachers saw it. Concerned adults tried to intervene. And the Department of Children and Family Services, they fumbled, dropped the ball, ignored the warning signs. Bureaucratic red tape strangled the very lifeline Ra needed, and took that anger and turned it into action. By 2020, she was sitting down with lawmakers, drafting Rica Law, a bill designed to hold child welfare agencies accountable. Background checks, mandatory follow-ups, No more unchecked reports gathering dust on some overwhelmed caseworker's desk. It's not perfect. It won't bring Ra back. But it's something. A step toward ensuring no other child falls through the cracks. Rica's story isn't just another tragedy. It's a wake-up call. Because child protection isn't just a government job. It's a human job, our job, your job. We all have a responsibility to speak up, to pay attention, to act. Because if we don't, we're no better than Richard, sitting silently while the worst happens right in front of us. Rica's light was stolen, but her story can still shine. Now it's on us to make sure no other child suffers in silence. Drop a comment below. What part of Rica's story shook you the most? Let's keep this conversation alive. And while you're here, hit like and subscribe, because stories like Ray's need to be told loudly.